everyone. So if you could get seated, we'll start here in about 2 seconds. You have 2 seconds. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tiedäkulma, or Think Corner. My name is Melissa Plath, and I'm from the University of Helsinki. You've seen me running around with some of our other Una colleagues, so I'm one of the team members here for Una Europa. We are so happy to host you and to host this event as part of the 4th Una Europa Student Congress, which brings together 64 students from 11 partner universities. We have been working for the past day and a half on topics about storytelling, developing our skills, working with community partners, and so much more. We have a really nice event planned for you tonight. So we'll have 2 different conversations which cover topics of belonging and community and joint narratives. The conversations are a little bit different from a normal panel, and I'll explain how they're going to work a little bit later. But we have chosen some folks who can offer different perspectives into these topics and who offer something special, some insights that we might all find interesting. At the same time, we know that you all have a diverse set of experiences, topics that you want to bring into the conversation, and we would encourage you to join the Padlet. You have the QR code up on the screen, and there I would love for you to put your reflections, your questions, your comments, and we'll come back to those at the end of the event. So keep adding to the Padlet so we can include your perspectives into the conversation. But first, to open the event, I would like to invite Kai Nordlund, who is the Vice Rector of Academic Affairs at the University of Helsinki, to the stage, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story and welcome us to this event. Kai.
Yes, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure to welcome you to the University of Helsinki on behalf of the entire rectorate. The chairman of the Una Europa board, Hanna Snellman, unfortunately, and well, ironically, is on a trip going abroad, so she couldn't make it here right now. But I'm also very happy to welcome you and tell a little bit about my touch on internationality here. Normally, in an event like this, I would give a 5-minute introduction to the strategic development of the University of Helsinki, but this time I was asked to do a bit more personal. Maybe Stinne has heard me talk about the strategy and thought that that's an exceptionally bad idea to talk about it here, so I won't be doing that. No, but I'd like to tell a little bit about my story. So I'm an alumni of this university. I studied here and did my PhD here back in 1995. I was working in a lab in the Kumpula campus, accelerator lab there, which back then was very non-foreign, non-international. There were no international people there. We are working fully in Finnish and Swedish. But after I finished my PhD, I went abroad for a postdoc in the US, in the University of Illinois, and that was really crucial for my career. Without going there, I wouldn't be standing here now. Even though our lab was fairly high level, good level here in Finland, we weren't quite up to touch of the latest methods in our field back then. But in this good group in the US was basically the best group in the world in our field of specialty. So I spent a couple of years postdoc there and learned a huge lot, basically all the skills which then led the basis of the rest of my career. So without these states, I definitely wouldn't have become a professor at this university and wouldn't be here now. So I gained a lot of international experience back then, and after I returned to Finland, I started building a research group and started hiring foreigners, which was first foreigner I hired was in 2000 or 2001, and back then our university gave zero support for it. I'll never forget that when I wanted to figure out how to do the paperwork to hire a foreigner, I first called the department office. The department office said, this doesn't belong to us, called the faculty office. Then I called the faculty office. They said, this doesn't belong to us. I called the university. Then I called the university central administration. They said, this doesn't belong to us, called the department. and really nobody could help me. The end result, I spent time reading myself the foreigner's law and figure out what kind of visa this scientist should get. Fortunately, since then, things have evolved up. Right now, every HR person at the university is qualified and knows how to handle the paperwork for foreigners. We have more than 30% foreign staff working. Well, the other reason I'm also particularly happy and feel close at heart to talk to foreigners is that I'm married to a foreigner, an only person came from outside the EU, and have two absolutely wonderful stepdaughters also from there. And well, without going into too much personal details, our family is funny in the way that we speak 4 different languages at home. Okay, not every day the children are adults, but when all the children are most of them are around, we can really speak four languages almost at the same time, and it's quite interesting. But at least you get used to speaking different languages and living in a multicultural family. And I really hope, I don't know your backgrounds, but the fact that you're here, you're clearly open to multicultural experiences, and I hope that most of you get to live in, at least if you haven't lived in different countries yet, get to do it. It really opens the eyes, and or get experience with other cultures in other ways. And in the end, I mean, I started saying that the lab I was working in back then was fully Finnish and Swedish speaking. By now, more than half of the staff of this lab are foreigner. And the biggest boss there, the head of the materials physics division, a very wonderful lady, is also a foreigner. So you can realize that things have, in just 30 years, things here in Finland have changed dramatically. We are, especially at our university, we are very happy to have a big fraction of foreign people. I'm very happy to be in the Una Europa collaboration network. I've been in many of the meetings, involved in some of the committees, and even today one of my meetings earlier was related to a possibly future Una Europa activity. So welcome from my side, and hope you have a nice, very nice event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kai, and for sharing your story and a little bit about yourself with us. Now we're going to start with the first conversation, and I would like to invite our first 3 conversationalists to the stage. On the slides, you can see we have 3 lovely individuals who are going to be discussing the theme of how we might consider the values or things that define a place in different ways. So we have Ella-Maria Lukala, who is a recent graduate of the teacher education program here at the University of Helsinki. She's an educator and a researcher by trade and an artist by heart, with an academic interest in equity and institutional power. Then we have Oliver Kuivasto, who is originally from Finland, but currently studying global and comparative philosophy at Leiden University. He's a passionate thinker who's always eager to learn more, to discover and understand the very things which unite us, or our unique stories. Finally, we have Paige Livingston, who's an international student advisor working together with the new International Student Advice to support the needs of international degree students at the University of Helsinki. They study intercultural encounters with their tight-knit group of course mates from around the world, and is currently working on their master's thesis to criticize and deconstruct racialized legislation in their home state of Florida. So, welcome to our 3 conversationalists. What we're going to do today is there will be no moderator, but we have asked the conversationalists to consider the theme from their own perspectives, and they are going to take the conversation forward by themselves. If needed, we have some cards with prompts on the table that can change and add to the conversation. But this is really a creative experiment to see how we can maybe think about these conversations in these types of events in a different way. So remember that you can add your reflections and questions on the Padlet during the conversation. We'll come back to them later. Now I'm going to turn it over to you 3. Go ahead.
All right, I received a meaningful look that I must start this conversation, and so I shall. Indeed, I'm Ella. I was born in Finland to Finnish-speaking parents. I carry the heritage of the most famous bear hunter in Finland. But to balance my inner country girl, I have always had a little bit of a strive for something bigger and someplace else. So I have found myself often speaking in English, even though I didn't have to, led to an international school, and now predominantly speak in English in my daily life. And so when it comes to reflecting on this, the place that I find myself in now, Finland and Helsinki, a lot of interesting thoughts come from this experience.
All right, I guess I can continue from here. I had also a bit of difficult time thinking about a good story here, but for me, maybe what I could resonate here is the decision to decide to study abroad. As a kind of typical Finn, very closed introvert, it was at least a bit fearful, the thought of studying abroad for me, and it was a very large development personally, or a growth personally, I think, the decision to go and study abroad. And also, I think that kind of story also, and how it shaped, also gives me a new perspective on how to reflect on my Finnishness, or what I value in my identity as being a Finn, with getting to know all the other stories abroad, how we all connect to each other with our unique backgrounds and so on. And that also gives our opportunity to look back on ourselves and our different stories and how we are shaped ourselves.
All right, and then I'm Paige. I am from Florida in the United States, but not really the Disney World, oh, I have a relative that has a vacation home there kind of Florida, but more the trailer park, yeehaw part of Florida. I actually, coming from that sort of background, never thought I would ever come to Europe at all. I never thought I'd be on a stage right now speaking with people about these types of topics. And for me, what I was reflecting on with my story a lot is sort of coming from that background and then going to university on fully funded scholarships, and sort of how difficult it is to get that. And then not only did I sort of have to work for these scholarships, but I actually studied East Asian studies and Japanese language, and did study abroad in Japan, and really worked towards living in Japan after graduating. But once I finally got there after COVID, when the borders were open again and I started work life and not study life, I realized even though, I speak this language and I have so many connections here and I've been working towards this for so long and this is what people know me for, I realized that it just completely did not align with who I was and what I wanted to do. But thankfully, I got an acceptance from the University of Helsinki and the opportunity to have a tuition waiver. So I ended up here thinking I don't know the language, I don't know the culture, and I only know one person from there that I met for a few days, but we'll see where it goes. So yeah, that's kind of where I am at this point.
Well, we're lucky to have you. One thing that kind of comes up, I feel like in all of our talks or stories, how do you reflect on the idea of belonging to a place from this perspective?
I guess for me, it really reflects on the fact that I get away from what I would call home, Finland in this instance, and Then last week, when I started to more like make it a fact that I'm coming back here home, in that sense, I started to make a list of the things I want to bring back to the Netherlands, all of the different Finnish things, those things I feel like belongs to me. I want to experience sauna and other obvious things, and also all of the concepts of Finnish society, the silence and just the people and everything. And I think that sense of belonging also comes when you get into a different environment and can reflect back on that which you missed very dearly and feel like it's close to your heart.
Do you get the chance or the same kind of a feeling, by the way, now that you are visiting Finland, about Netherlands? Have you formed that kind of a bond, do you think?
Oh, that's a very, very deep question indeed. I think so too, yeah. I feel like it's very much different in some senses. I miss kind of the narrow streets and the canals and the very heavy wind and drinking culture and all kind of those things that I feel like are like my everyday life there, the walks I take to the university and those kind of things that you don't have here. And I think that really reflects on the places where we are, and those really give ourselves like meanings to the different things we value. Yeah.
It's really interesting hearing you say those things, because I feel like I'm the opposite, where I kind of started out in a place where I felt like something was wrong, something's off, I don't know what it is, but at least right now with the people like in my program and the people that I've met here and even my workplace at the university, I feel like I belong because I feel like I'm really seen. I feel like a lot of times in my life I've either had to kind of play a role either with, you know, in academia, okay, I can't let people know like how broke I am. Let me be like, yes, I definitely know what everybody's talking about. Or with things with gender, like, yes, I'm definitely superwoman. That the people that I have in my life right now, I know that even if I tried to put up some kind of facade or something, they would be able to see through it, but that they actually really accept that, even though we are like different and we come from so many different places. And I know even behind, like not behind my back, but when they talk about me with other people, they talk about me how I am, if that makes sense. Like I don't have to constantly remind them, like, this is who I am, this is where I come from, and yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Part of the reason why I ask this is because I relate to both of your experiences as well. Like, I find myself missing a lot of the things out of the places that I come back from. But then there's also been this very clear change in my feelings of belonging to a place, that they stem from not necessarily about anything changing about the place, but rather kind of finding myself in it. That I feel like that sense of I've started to kind of like take the space that I want to take as to my identity and my being as a whole. The kind of a place that I'm in has started to shape itself around me to the extent that I can't view it the same way that I used to. Mm-hmm. That now it's kind of like when I walk the same streets that used to make me nervous, I feel like they welcome me now. Or when I visit home, it's like I can get more in touch with some aspects of my personality rather than others. And it's not so pressuring anymore. We also had this in small countryside town, queerness, for example, was a very new thing. So it doesn't feel like threatening anymore. It feels welcoming, but because of a change that happened in me rather than the surroundings.
All right, from that I think I had a question about, do you feel then the sense of belonging is in that kind of sense something that is a continual progress, that you really don't never fully like end like that progress, but rather you continually have this kind of...
Yes, and to for example, think about the concept of like Finnishness. I feel like the same kind of a continuity is relevant to that as well, like, because I feel Finnish in some ways and non-Finnish in others, and reflecting on that kind of a thought made me think about like, well, what is the optimal Finnishness? What does that look like? And it's you first come to think about the kind of like the cultural stereotypes, the saunas and the silence as well, but like it doesn't really exist. Similarly, as I feel like that perfect belonging doesn't really exist either, but it is nice getting a little bit like closer to the belonging. Not that I think that one needs to get closer to the optimal Finnishness, but yeah, it feels like a continuity.
And it's interesting how you talk about like the things that kind of don't exist, since it's like we kind of create the reality we live in through our experiences, and we have those experiences through the lens of the identities we have. This has so many layers, but yeah, I feel like one thing that I've been thinking about a lot as well, that's not only with yourself, but kind of with other people, when you talk about like belonging and how do we make other people or everyone feel like they belong, kind of having to realize and accept that everybody has multiple realities and they can all be true at the same time. Even if we share some of the same backgrounds, we'll still experience everything differently. So I think when we talk about belonging, that's kind of the thing that I think is the most difficult to do, because it's not easy to just... It sounds easy when you say it, that, oh, other people will experience things differently than me, but when you hear someone say something that's different than your experience, sometimes you'll, without even thinking about it, you feel yourself go, well, I think this way, and then kind of taking, I think, a thing to help like create spaces where everyone can belong is sort of practicing holding those multiple realities at the same time and having respect for all of them too.
Yes, absolutely. What you said about this, the kind of like the belonging or that becoming really visible only when it's contradicted is a interesting thing in my opinion. Like I, for example, think about Finnishness from the perspective of my grandfather, who continues to inhabit a city where he understands less and less of it because the language is changing to English, for example. Or like you said, when you encounter somebody who clearly operates on a different kind of a reality, that's what accentuates the belonging or the lack thereof.
Do you have any thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, I think also it's very fascinating how the one place we all can have different senses of belonging. For somebody it resonates more, and for some it doesn't feel as home in the same sense of things, and also how with time we develop different views of the same place we have been to before or lived before, and how it really is a progress of things.
Thank you so much to our three conversationalists. I think that was such an insightful, interesting look at place and belonging. And I was just thinking while you were talking that how much place shapes us and how it changes us, but you can still revisit these old selves when you visit those places. And I think this was a really nice point that you all brought up, and reflecting it from my own experience, being someone who's moved from the United States to Finland a long time ago, that it's always interesting to return to the US and get this reminder of who I was there, and then to come back to Finland and inhabit who I am here. So thank you for sharing. Okay, we'll now move to you can leave the mics on the chairs, and we'll now have the next three conversationalists. And I really can see here that we've had some engagement with the Padlet, and I will remind you to keep putting your questions, reflections, thoughts, and we'll come back to these towards the end of the event. But we will now have the next conversation between our three non-panelists. And you guys are switching it up, not sitting according to your pictures. I like it. No, I like it. No. Let's keep this creative. So we'll start with Kelly here. So Kelly Brito Salas is a project planner at the Finnish University Partnership for International Development, or UNIPID. She's driven by efforts and environments that help communities build strong relationships and develop their capacities to address systemic inequality. Diversity and change are deeply rooted in her identity, and she believes in connections and collaborations to achieve shared goals. Then we have Minna Huotilainen. Minna is a neuroscientist and a professor of educational sciences at the University of Helsinki. She's worked in several Finnish and foreign universities and research centers, often in multidisciplinary environments. She's the founding program director of one of the university's most diverse international master's programs, the program in Changing Education, uniting students of more than 27 nationalities. Finally, we have Julius Gast. Julius studies law and East Asian studies at Freie Universität Berlin. As a former senator, he's currently an FUB representative in the Una Europa Student Board, where he has recently had the honor to be elected as one of the co-chairs. Congratulations.
Thanks to Lindsay.
As a European, Una Europa is a great opportunity to meet new friends and to be part of a new way to strengthen international relations in Europe and around the world for every student. So again, there's no moderator, and the spark for this conversation is what makes you belong to a place and how do you build that connection? Over to you three.
We actively tried not to meet before, so we're actually meeting just now here on the stage, so I can just quickly introduce myself as well. So as you all know, my name is Kelly Brito, and to get to know me a bit more I'm Colombian. I've lived 7 years in Finland, and I was both an exchange student and also a master's degree student at the University of Helsinki. Now I also employed by the University of Helsinki, specifically through UNIPID, working on Global South perspectives, global responsibility, responsible collaborations. So basically that's my background and how I ended up here. Ethics on responsibility, ethics on collaborations has been sort of a constant in my past 2 years, talking about different values, different principles. So what role do I play in my community based on my experiences and perspectives? I feel like building connections, sort of wearing the learner hat, and also I take advantage of my sort of personal ways of being that I actually like to talk a lot, and also I'm super curious about people. So why are you here and why are we here today?
Okay, maybe I can also introduce myself a bit. I was born in the 1960s when it was still the Cold War, and I was a teenager in Helsinki during the Finlandization time, so Helsinki was not at all fun at that time. I can tell you, very different city from what it is now. I've lived in several countries in Europe. Well, it depends on how you define living, but stayed for a bit longer periods of time. And this question really resonates to me because I've been several times in the situation that I've been thinking that, will I be able to feel at home here? Or is this going to be a time when I'm just doing my job and missing home? And every time I've managed to start feeling at home.
Yeah, so like introduced earlier, Julia's a student from Berlin, born after the Cold War in West Berlin, but growing up in Berlin also means you are reminded of the past. So my university, the Freie Universität Berlin, was founded as a counterpart of the Communist University in East Berlin, and therefore still its motto is liberty, freedom, and justice. And so while studying there, you also get sometimes the freedom to do what you want. So I went to Japan, and there my home university had the motto like live locally, grow globally. In Japanese, it's something like Shikiniki Sekai ni Nobiru. Sorry for my pronunciation, but why do I say this? So while going around, you often meet people, and then it's often that you gather around because you have something in common. I participated here at a workshop earlier where the first question was, find something you have in common. And some people said, oh, we all have an I in the name, or we all love to travel around. And for me, when I was in Japan, it was basically, oh, we are both at the University of Una Europa. So while being a dancing club with 20 Japanese students where the people don't like to speak English immediately, it's great to have a student from KU Leuven who's able to speak fluently Japanese, so you can have a translator and have a better friendship there. So this is like the first step to create a friendship. Later, of course, when there was an event in Leuven last year, we meet again. So this is how we created that. And the question is, how do we build that connection and have that connection over the years is also quite important, because it's not good if you meet one time and meet again. So this student congress is also there. How can we meet again in 10 years? And some other people asked that. And one of the questions was there, how do we define a place, or how can you find a place? And it's a similar thing then. Can a university give a home feeling or feeling like home when you return to a place? And that is in today's workshop, again, it's good to have these workshops to be prepared for the speech. You have the chance to, there was a student who said, home is where a safe place is. So safe spaces, so people can speak about their concerns. They don't get judged because they have a strong German accent. They don't get judged because they like a specific kind of music, but they can friends and interact. And this kind of community feeling is important, where you can also talk about topics that are very political, like we have here flyers about the situation in Palestine and Israel right now. And as you might know, some universities, the students there all share in common, we want peace, etc., but it might be sometimes a very controversial how it is adjusted. And it is better to meet in a neutral place to talk about this as students, as friends, as a community, without being biased if you have never met earlier before. And therefore, these Una Europa deals to, in 10 years, that we can look back and say, oh, we study at Una Europa, at campus in Leuven, campus Berlin, we have that feeling. We are here in Helsinki. I didn't know so many people here either, but sometimes I meet people for the first time and I've met them earlier online, so there's also a friendship. So I'm not totally lost here. I don't speak Finnish at all, so it's still great to be here, and that's why it's good.
Yeah, I can also echo that. I also don't speak Finnish, even though I've lived 7 years here. But then how do I make myself belong in a community that by physically, maybe I look different, I also speak a different language, I come from a very opposite side of the world, and then how do I fit in this context? And perhaps I also echo what you were saying, trying to find connections, whether it's through interest, through personal experience, through, for example, in my case, I admire certain personalities. I'm a people person. I'm passionate about people. So I like to wear the learner hat and in the workplace, but also in my personal life, just to really learn how people do things, how people think, how people like to engage, what people understand about responsibility, about respect, about honesty. So I think I go back and forth between my personal life and my professional life, trying to grapple the question about belonging and how do I make myself feel part of the community in both places. What about you?
Yeah, I think language is really important because I've lived only once in a place where I didn't speak the local language, and that was Hungary. And it was I really needed a translator because not so many people wanted to speak English at that time, and many people couldn't speak English. And then I was trying with my poor German also to speak a little bit, but it was really helpful to have somebody who could both translate the language, but also to translate a little bit like the culture too. But otherwise, I mean, Finland is kind of a specific place, especially Helsinki, that you don't really need to speak Finnish to find your local community here, because we have so many communities where people just speak English. So I think it's a bit different.
Well, I mean, I'm here right now invited because I am elected as a co-chair together with Lindsay, who sits here in the second row. And I think being a member also in the student board and participating here at the student congress meeting like the 60 other students here is really good, because we are not here as a student board members, but normal students with their own thoughts, approaches on those things. So we can participate more and be our more personal opinion generator, so we can say what we think. But then when it comes to dealing with the stakeholders of Una Europa, like the board of directors, of course, then we have to collect all the informations we gathered earlier, like how can we create more safe spaces inside the alliance, how can we deal with students who, for example, are on one hand very extrovert, but need their a quiet time in the later evening, that it's not too crowded, for example, those things, to focus on the normal students as well. Then, of course, it is a switching point where we can, of course, build on our own experience, but need to be a little bit more professional so that the board of directors also see, okay, yeah, they really speak to their students and they have their own data where they get it from. So this is, I think, also kind of important that the people also who participate, I mean, we have way over 400,000 students who could, in theory, participate at Una Europa. Not all are reached. We have a lot of lovely professors, staff members, and external people who also contribute to this community building. And Una Europa is just 4 years old, and 3 of them were during the pandemic. So now is basically the real start where we can say, okay, what do we want to do in the future? And if we all come together then joining, then it's way better also to look in the future in the next 10 years how it will change. So, but there's...
Do you think, I actually have a question, but do you think there's a certain trait in your personality or a certain strong identity that makes you build, like helps you build communities in your work, for example?
Well, I think the best way is to be open-minded, and this is the FU Berlin approach, that everyone can be a part. I don't know if Simon is still here, because Simon is, yeah, perfect. So Simon is the best example. So he is a staff member at FU, but basically the honorable, most important member of our local task force for the students, because he also helps us getting to reach our points. And so it's like to get being able to also think about what is the other person might be feeling of. I try to avoid the topic, but for example, music as well. You can do music in the evenings in karaoke together and ensure, as a normal student participant, that everyone feels invited or has a point where he feels belong to this kind of thing, even though they're the only student from a specific area. And I think this is the first part to really get on good terms on a personal level. We as students can do that. The staff members either have to work together, but the students have the luck to be more, we can be relaxed and then think about what do we really want to ensure that, because we also don't have time. But I think, what would the professors say? How do you work together when creating the community here?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the learner's hat, and I think that's the most important thing, to be curious towards other people's thinking and to kind of want to learn, to understand how they feel and how they think and what is important to them and what are they afraid of and what would their desires be. So if you genuinely want to know that, so then I think that you are actually taking a very important step in the community building.
Yeah, and also I think like taking a step back and giving the space for people to feel comfortable for sharing their experiences. Like by my work experience, I've also learned to appreciate people's stories and people's lived experiences, because people become their experts of their own experience. So in my case specifically, we are talking about Global South perspectives, and not because I'm from the Colombia, it means that I'm an expert in Global South. I still have to sort of wear that learner hat and take a step back and listen to what the partners in this case in academic collaborations are saying, and really understand where they're coming from. We had a session with students just before this, talking about positionalities and then talking about how different are people's contexts, and then to a certain extent it's very difficult to come to a consensus or comes to common ways of working, but just the fact of understanding that and being mindful of that is important to create a sense of belonging, for example.
Yeah, and I also think that we are getting a lot out of that situation, that I'm meeting a person who has completely different life experiences compared to me. So it would be really a pity if I didn't learn anything from that person. So I'm also considering, for example, my position in the Changing Education Master's Program as a big privilege to learn from so many different perspectives and so many different people, and they have completely different backgrounds and life experiences.
Do you think that there is something that there should be a mind shift in order to create some sense of belonging, for example, in our work environment or in our everyday life?
Well, I mean, there are those basic things that if I think about my own, the floor where I work and the rooms next to my office, I mean, the coffee room is always empty. There's nobody there. Why is that? People just feel so super busy, and they are just running from one lecture to the next, or one meeting to the next. And you know, this kind of culture also requires that people stop for a while, you know, and meet each other. We have tried to create coffee room culture. We have tried to have these invited coffee sessions, and then people come over, and we have some program there, and then they come. But this kind of basic coffee room culture where you would expect that you go to the coffee room, that there's always people there, and you can talk to somebody, it doesn't exist in our offices. And I think it's after the pandemic, it has gotten worse. So if a person has online meetings, they don't even come to the workplace during that day. So then they are missing the coffee room.
The only part I got before we got on the stage was that this building itself was completely different a couple of years ago. And like it changed here as well, it's like a more shinier, more brighter, so that's definitely a way to get more people attending here and not just being afraid of it. And I think this is very easy for Una Europa also to build that, to get more students engaged somehow. So I mean, in the last years, we had the student congress online. Now that it's more in person again, and so more students get to know each other. And if you always have a person being somewhere, being in charge, that there are some drinks later for this event, if I see that correctly, that we have the chance to chat with each other is also great, and then that you get to stay in contact with that person. And I think this is something, especially we as a student right now, and also together with the others, know well, and we will see each other again. I've learned that at least 2 participants met each other 2 years ago at an Una Health Summer School in Edinburgh. And so it's like, oh, after 2 years, they see each other again and know, oh, yeah, we have spoken at least once. And this is like the connection Una Europa can build. Now it's just a couple of 100 students, and hopefully in the future even more, and to sustain it so that there's a little bit proud saying, oh, I was there at the Student Congress, and that is like, oh, what would you say in that regard? To have a good coffee room.
I think like in my work, how do I enhance like sense of belonging or community, or like at least personally, whenever there's a meeting going on, like of course I'm very engaged in the theme, but then I'm constantly reflecting on the spot and very curious of how that specific person that I'm talking to ended up there. So like I'm really curious about people's past and how they ended up there, and like that sense of trying to create some connections outside of work as well, that I could build sort of a connection with the person outside, and then how do I bring that in a work environment? So in my case specifically, I'm working with different stakeholders as well in different projects, and I sort of bring some personal principles or values, like for example, communication for me is key. So I try to bring that in the workplace. Some people don't like it, but I personally love it. And just to make yourself like feel uncomfortable or awkward sometimes. So awkward is good, just like for the sake of shaking things up a bit, trying to get to know how people feel in different environments, and also, yeah, try different things out. That's what I try to do.
It's also up to like spaces like this one. So it's also like an architectural design thing, that places where people can enter, feel safe, just, you know, you can just walk in from the door and you can see there's some science going on, and you can hear a little bit about it, and you don't, nobody's asking you like, who are you? You can just come over. And also about digital spaces, like keeping the connections after you met somebody, to really like ask, okay, are you also coming to this event, and so on. You can already beforehand kind of prepare the person that we are going to meet again in that moment.
It's especially good for couch surfing, I have learned. Best way ever. Yes. To meet people again if you go there. It saves a lot of money, especially if you go to Dublin, because out of my own experience, it's a little bit expensive to find a hostel with bunch beds there under 50 euros on a weekend.
Amazing. Actually, my first couch and only couch surfing experience was here in Helsinki, coming straight from Colombia. The person gave me their keys of the apartment and left. And I was like, how do you trust me if you don't know me? And that just kept on in my head, like society here somehow trusts you without knowing you, so I'm going to trust you back as well, and I'm going to meet that expectation.
Yeah.
The better, the more. So
yeah.
Not just Helsinki, but also the other 10 universities. But
Yeah. So there's a lot of couches here, I think, in this room to be served.
We remind you.
I'm going to come in now, and with that good note that we have a lot of couches, so we'll be seeing you in the future. I really enjoyed this conversation a lot, and one of the things that I was thinking about as you were speaking is about this feeling of belonging and how it can come from something big like language, but it can also be these small things like going to karaoke together. And for me, it's about like finding the sports team to support, because I'm a big sports person. So it's nice that you can find these ways of belonging in small ways, but also the big ones. And another thing that just kind of came out to me, and I thought it was really interesting what you all were saying, is that listening and kind of the other side of belonging is making people feel welcome and feel like they belong, so that it's not just a one-sided thing, but there has to be this kind of shared approach to feeling or creating a community that people can belong to. So I thought that was a really nice reflection from your side. I'm going to ask the three other panelists to come up, but let's thank these three for this conversation. I mean, some of you can stand and sit, and you do what you want to do. We're keeping it funky up here. Okay, so I have a few reflections here from the Padlet, and I'm going to throw some your way. I have a Post-it, but then I also have purple colors. So it's nice to see that there were a lot of people finding that the conversation was insightful, and maybe one that we could bring out is around this kind of optimal Finnishness or optimal insert place, Americanness, Montananness, Central Finlandness, I don't know. How do you is being a typical Finn or whatever comforting because you fit in, or is it limiting because you are expected to be any certain way? Popcorn style, whoever wants to answer, go for it.
Personally, I think it's restrictive, and actually my academic interest has to do a lot with this as well, particularly what is the optimal migrant in research, for example. And I would prefer that we try not to, or I would prefer that there not be these like optimal characterizations of a certain schema that we have, but they are ever so prevalent, and they impact the way that we look at the world around us all the time. So it is, but yes, as a person who does kind of like fit a lot of those aspects, it's quite easy to navigate, for example, the space around me, and to become kind of like blind to it in a certain way.
Others?
Yeah. I love this question when people ask me, how big percentage are Finns in the Changing Education program? Because I get this conversation going, what do you mean by Finns? Yeah. And then they realize that, okay, we have a person who is Finnish citizen, but she doesn't speak any Finnish, she never lived in Finland. Yeah. We have Finns who did their bachelor's degree somewhere else, so they don't actually know the Finnish university system at all because they never studied in a university in Finland. And then we have people who have lived in Finland for quite a while, and Finnish is their native language, but they are not citizens of Finland. So what do you actually mean by a Finn? And I love this conversation because it's opening people's thoughts that, okay, they realized that they were thinking of this kind of one type of Finn, and then they realized that they didn't think enough.
And it's interesting because I am a Finnish citizen nowadays, and I have to remind myself quite often that, oh yes, I am also a Finn.
You're a Finn.
I'm also a Finn. Any other reflections from our conversationalists?
It's been very weird for me going from a country where I know the language and I know the culture, but because I don't look like I'm from there, people are afraid to come up to me in the store when I need something. But then to come here where I'm actively trying to avoid people because I don't know what they're saying to me in Finnish, but they think I'm Finnish and they come find me. So and I think that ties into what you were saying and also your comments as well, because people will look at me and because of my appearance think, oh, Finnish. But like I know, and I've met so many Finnish people whose parents aren't from Finland, and they are Finnish, and they speak Finnish as their first language, but when people look at them, they automatically think that they're not Finnish. So it's very interesting.
I think a really interesting question that at least comes to my sight, but of course this is because I'm interested in these kinds of questions, is how sense of belonging and privileges are related. And I wonder if you guys could reflect on that. Go ahead, Julius.
It deals a lot. So I would say the sense of belonging is also a kind of thankfulness to being part of something. The best privilege would be like, do you have the money to travel around Europe to attend a congress with other students you have never met before? And depending on where you go, and if you do it 2 times a year as a student board, for example, that's up to 2,000 euros you have to spend. No, not many students have that money. Thankfully, some universities pay that money before the congress. Some, however, pay it afterwards. That's an internal Una Europa discussion, but that is the start. And right now, we also realize that, the students who study at the university also already have privilege compared to other communities, maybe kindergarten friends who never went to high school, for example, etc. But to get to know and realize, oh, we have the privilege now, we aren't in the Cold War anymore, so we can travel to countries much easier and have the thing, I think, is the first step to realize what we can change because we know we have the privilege. And it starts with money, it starts with the freedom to travel, it starts with then continues with freedom to do their own research, talk about, and also being able to say, hey, by the way, I don't like it. The thing I want to say, the thing was, okay, the lingua franca, that English is the language there. It's also depending on where you grow up. not many people feel comfortable with. And there was the saying, you don't know how intelligent I am in Spanish and German and so on, or how funny people are in German. Because you have to know the language there. But this is like the start to get it. And right now, of course, most students can speak English, but there might be alternatives also. So far right now, a student wouldn't be able to know what is the student board doing because we don't have it visualized what we are doing right now. So you have to be able to see, or someone to read it for you. So it's not completely inclusive, but we are on our way. That's why there are these Helsinki hackathons also dealing with these things. So yes, sadly, it's still a privileged thing, but our duty is now to get more people involved somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too because I was talking with my colleagues actually, since we're the international student advice, and one of the biggest things that we handle are tuition fees and scholarships. And the only people who get tuition fees and scholarships are people who have to pay to come here and have to pay to get a residence permit and have to show that they have the funds to be here and things like that. And we think about this quite a lot, and one of my, because I'm a scholarship student, and so is one of my coworkers, and we were actually talking about this, like, do you ever feel terrible guilt? Like, why did I get to come here? Why did things line up for me that I got this position? And then there's people I want to help, but maybe I can't help them as much. And what if somebody else could be having this job right now and this opportunity? But we kind of paused and thought about it, and kind of like what you were talking about is, well, no, it's not like that somebody deserves it more than somebody else, or that somebody else should have this opportunity and somebody else shouldn't, but that there shouldn't be this many barriers that keeps people out, because we get so many students that should be able to come here, but they just financially can't, you know. So yeah, I think about that a lot as well.
I think I would also want to problematize a bit the role of privilege in the sense of belonging, and then I reflect a bit on my work, and then maybe like the stereotypical privilege of, like, for example, being white or speaking in English and things like that, how that becomes counteractive for the sense of belonging, or the sense of playing a role in the sense of belonging. And I wanted to hear also your perspectives from that point of view, because I think that privilege can also make you not belong in a certain way.
Yes, actually this kind of relates to something that I feel very passionate about, or passionate and confused, which is like these social categories, right? Like we've talked about, for example, when it comes to determining who has to pay for university, like here it's based on social categories. Similarly, my work dealing with migrants, what is that social category about? Or gender, or however we go about, or like whatever kind of social categories we talk about. The conflict I have is that on the one hand, I recognize that they are kind of like necessary so that we can strive for the kind of like structural equity that there was a little bit of like talk about, like, for example, that like if you belong to this certain group, you cannot, you have to pay for tuition, so you should be eligible for the grants and so on. But on the other hand, when it comes to us, and I think this part relates to belonging perhaps more, but when it comes to how we actually interact with each other, that we would desperately need to stop trying to distinguish which labels and which social categories the other one represents. Like my English-speaking partner, who is a very ambiguous Finn, right, constantly has to justify why they speak English, or why they look the way they do, or why, as if there is this, to return back to this, like this optimal Finn, and they are not fulfilling the categories, or like the requirements for it. So to separate the two I think like brings us a little bit like closer to the sense of belonging as well.
And on that note, I'm getting the time's up signal from my colleagues, so I would like us all to thank our conversationalists for this. There are so many good inputs into this Padlet that I would love to pick up, but I would love for you guys to pick them up and talk with our conversationalists over some sparkling wine and some finger food, which is offered just over here. So we are very happy to invite you to stay for a little while, have some sparkling wine, continue the conversations with our conversationalists amongst yourselves. And we hope you take the opportunity to chat and get to know each other a little bit better. So thank you very much for coming.